So what does it actually take to live a good life? I mean, it's a massive question, right? But more than 2,000 years ago, the philosopher Aristotle gave us this incredibly powerful way of thinking about it, and you'd be shocked how much it still shapes our world. So today, we're going to break down his guide to virtue and justice. Let's get into it. Okay, let's start with a little scenario. Picture this. Two students cheat on an exam. On the surface, the act is exactly the same. But one of them meticulously planned it for days, while the other just completely panicked and made a terrible split-second decision. So here's the question. Are they equally to blame? This is precisely the kind of problem Aristotle wants us to wrestle with. And trust me, this is not just some abstract philosophical game. This exact kind of thinking is alive and well right in our own legal system. I mean, every single time a courtroom has to figure out the difference between premeditated murder and manslaughter, what they're really doing is asking an Aristotelian question. It's about so much more than just what you did. It's about your intention, what you knew, and the choice you made. All right, here's our game plan. We're going to start with how to judge actions, not just the acts themselves. Then we'll look at Aristotle's blueprint for becoming a good person. We'll dig into why he calls justice the master virtue, break down two different kinds of fairness, and then wrap up by asking a really big question. Is there such a thing as a universal higher law? Okay, first up, judging actions, not just acts. See, before we can even begin to talk about what makes a person good or bad, Aristotle says we have to figure out when someone is actually responsible for what they do. This is the foundation of everything. So Aristotle makes this really fundamental distinction. He says an action is voluntary when the choice comes from inside you and you basically know what's going on. That's the stuff you can get credit for or get blamed for. But on the other hand, an action is involuntary if you're forced into it, by some external power, or if you are genuinely clueless about a key piece of information. That changes the moral math completely. And this brings us to a super important Greek term, proairesis. Now, this isn't just any old choice. It means deliberate choice. It's that moment when your logical brain chews on a problem, figures out a path, and then your will actually commits to it. For Aristotle, this is the real window into your character, not just some gut reaction or a sudden impulse. So, how does this whole idea of deliberate choice help you build a good life? Well, that leads us to maybe Aristotle's most famous concept of all, his blueprint for virtue, which is known as the doctrine of the mean. And this chart illustrates it perfectly. Let's take any area of life, like how we handle fear. On one end of the spectrum, you have the vice of cowardice. That's too little confidence. On the total opposite end, you've got the vice of rashness. That's way too much. The virtue, courage, isn't just some boring 50-50 split. It's the mean, that perfect sweet spot, the right way to respond in that specific situation. And it is so important to get this right. The mean is not a mathematical average. Being courageous doesn't mean you're 50% brave. It means you have the practical wisdom to figure out the exact right way to act for you in this moment. Think about managing your money or even your time online. The goal is always to find that healthy, appropriate balance, not just to follow some rigid one-size-fits-all rule. Okay, so we've got a model for individual virtues. But get this, Aristotle dedicates an entire book of his work on ethics to just one of them. So let's talk about justice, the master virtue, and find out why it gets this star treatment. Here's what makes it so special. Most of the other virtues, like courage or self-control, they're about managing your own internal world, your own soul. But justice? It's fundamentally different. It's all about our relationships. It's about how we live our lives with other people in a community. This quote just nails it. Justice is the virtue of the political animal par excellence. That's what Aristotle called us humans, social or political animals. We live together in societies. And because of that, justice is the one virtue that holds everything and everyone together. It is the absolute bedrock of a functioning society. But justice is a huge word. It's complex. So Aristotle, being Aristotle, breaks it down for us into two main kinds of fairness, what he calls distributive and corrective justice. And these two types of justice are designed to solve two totally different problems. Distributive justice asks the question, how do we divvy up the good stuff in a community, like awards or positions of power? And the answer is, you do it proportionally. You give to each person based on their merit or what they've contributed. Now, corrective justice, that kicks in after someone's been wronged. It asks, how do we make things right again? And the solution here is just simple arithmetic. You take the unfair gain away from the person who did wrong, and you give it back to the victim to restore the balance. Now, hold on, because here's a really crucial clarification. When Aristotle talks about distributive justice, he is not talking about what we think of today as wealth redistribution. He's thinking about how to hand out earned honors in public offices. The modern version of this would be questions like, who deserves to get into the best universities? Or how do we decide who gets paid what based on their performance? Those are real Aristotelian questions. So this entire framework of justice really boils down to one final and pretty profound question. Is there a higher law? And this brings us to the timeless debate between what we call nature versus convention. On one side of the debate, you've got nomos. You can think of this as law by custom or by human agreement. It's just the set of rules that a specific community agrees to live by. The law in Athens might be different from the law in Sparta, and either one could be changed tomorrow. But on the other side, you have physis, which means nature. And this points to a standard of right and wrong that exists whether we agree to it or not, something that's independent of what any government or culture happens to say. It's a kind of justice that's baked into the very nature of being human. And this creates this incredibly powerful and still very relevant tension. Think about it. If justice is only convention, only nomos, then basically any law passed by a government is valid, no matter how awful it is. There's no higher court of appeal. But if there is a natural justice, one based on physis, then suddenly we have a standard we can use to judge our own laws, and even to stand up and declare that they are fundamentally unjust. So let's end by looping all the way back to where we started, with a question that really puts these ideas to the test. When a person does something wrong out of ignorance, and I don't mean ignorance of the law, but ignorance of a crucial fact of the situation, what is the just thing to do? Should we punish them? Should we excuse them? Or is there something else we should do? Aristotle gave us the tools, but the final judgment, well, that's still up to us.